Okay, I'm good.
All right, good morning, friends and gamers, and welcome to what is this now? Well, we've done a multiple episodes at this point. So this is chapter 10.9 of Global War 1936, version 4 rules. Me and Wintermute here are doing a bit of a review throughout them, reading through them kind of progressively because, for fun, right? And also it helps if you throw ideas back and forth between two people. Certain things kind of come up, and especially certain things are highlighted too, as a person might read it differently than the other party, and the ideas bounce off back and forth. So yeah, we want to backtrack a little bit and cover some stuff from the previous one. But I want to say, while I have people, while I dominate the center stage at this moment, that the way I'm working through these rules is kind of in a linear perspective, so or linear reading through. So I'm not reading through and then bouncing ahead and back. I'm just progressing through the rules in such a way, and I think that's the way rules should be written. They should be written kind of linearly, where you don't have to jump ahead to cover something that you just covered now, or jump backwards 10 paces. Even though backwards I'll accept a lot more, but jumping forward I won't. I don't prefer that in my rule books. I want it to be in somewhat of a linear fashion, or at least heavily referenced to stuff back and forth if need be. Okay, so that's the way I'm reading this, and then I'll hand the mic over here to Wintermute.
Well, yeah, the way you're describing, where you have to bounce around the book. There's a concept in computer programming called spaghetti code, where it just everything, it's
Yeah,
it's not a loop that
yeah.
you can easily follow. It's just this goes here and then
Mm-hmm.
and it just
Mm-hmm.
becomes this mess. And yeah, that can happen with rule books too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've seen it, I've experienced it. I've read reviews about otherwise great games that
Mm-hmm.
oh, I want to get this, but man, like the guy doing the review is like, but this rule book sucks,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and it dampens the overall experience. While the game is great, man, to
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to play, it's a nightmare.
Yeah,
So
that's right. But
so
this
yeah, that's
rulebook
what
is
I
fairly
think of,
well written.
huh?
Honestly, I find this rulebook quite well written, to be honest. There's a few things I'd
Well,
like
they're
a little
still
bit better,
cleaning some
but
stuff up
oh
too.
yeah,
There's
absolutely, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, Okay. Oh, okay. So there were 2 points that were made, or two things that came up in the last video that I think are worth touching on. First one is that I misunderstood that when subs choose to engage ships that are moving through, it's a full-blown single round of combat. So
Yeah.
pot shot's not the right term, and
Yeah,
those
yeah.
ships do get to shoot back. Now, if you hear this and then you watch that, or go back and watch that, or rethink about it, that's going to change the overall kind of assessment of how kind of what we are talking about.
hmm
However, you made the point that you think that the examples still need to be cleaned up,
Yeah, it does. It seems to
and I
lean in
agree.
a specific direction. If a person is not familiar with the rest of the rule book, then that particular part might throw them off, right? Or something like that. Yeah.
And then there was another point about how fighters have to unload from carriers before carriers go into port.
hmm
Now, I said that doesn't make sense from a practical,
mm
real world experience. However, it was pointed out by a buddy of mine that in a very real practical sense, that is actually a lot more correct. At least in one way to look at it,
Right.
because planes could the carriers had to be moving at a certain speed for planes to be able to take off at that point. We didn't
hmm
have catapults or jet engines and things that could ramp themselves up and
Yeah,
then
yeah,
shoot off the deck like we do now.
yeah.
And so, if a carrier was in port, it basically could not raise its aircraft.
hmm
They were either on there or they were offloaded or whatever the case is.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, even carriers had to turn around, like 180 degrees to send aircraft, and then to receive aircraft, they'd have to turn around 180 degrees in relative to the wind, right?
Hmm.
For whatever reason as well, too, right? So yeah, there's that.
And I'll be admit, and I've said this before, is my understanding of naval combat is way far less than it is of ground combat. I don't
hmm
I just I I don't like the water. I don't even know how to swim, so I just like it's a boat. I
Right,
don't care.
right,
Yeah.
right.
For but so I have learned more over the years that I've tried to, like, I've watched some documentaries about naval combat and whatnot, and some realities of ships. So I don't pretend to know very much about the naval tactics and doctrines and whatnot, and the reality of that.
hmm
Now,
hmm
that does raise the question, though: what are the impact on the game? and I think it's still a little awkward to do it this way.
Hmm.
I think you're better. I think, you and I were just talking, and it's like, okay, why don't I get to just leave it on the carrier, but then it just doesn't get to engage in combat while it's in port.
Well,
You know,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that's what I would say, because
yeah.
this way I can still have my aircraft carrier scramble with a fighter
Hmm.
on it, which may be a very now once it scrambles out, it is no longer in port. The fighter
Hmm.
engages in combat.
Hmm.
To
Hmm.
me, that makes sense. Because as it is, it's like, okay, well, I kind of in a position where it's obviously the right choice to put this carrier in port, but in doing so, that plane now has to lose a movement point on the following turn to get
Yeah,
anywhere. When
that's right.
I could have just chosen to leave it on the
Hmm.
carrier deck, and I think that should be a perfectly reasonable option for
Sure.
players
Yeah.
to do. I just leave it on the deck and it doesn't respond.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you can scramble, if yeah, like you said, it was saving your movement points. So in theory, you can move your 3C zones with your carrier, and then your aircraft could have hit one space further or whatever, right? One space and then come back and land on the carrier. Yeah, absolutely. It kind of shoots yourself in the foot in some regards with carriers, but maybe that's the downside. Now, my 2 cents of it is from a practical board game experience. Well, okay, that doesn't sound quite right. From a perspective that the board game turn is like 6 months. It's like, okay, the carrier shows up. Do you need to physically move everything off? That's a few extra steps as a player that do you necessarily really need to do in the span of 6 months to say, okay, well, the enemy's approaching the port, it's their turn, it's the German turn, they're approaching the British, port, wherever it is. And it's a span of, I don't know how many months. It's like, okay, we have plenty of time to offload that carrier. We have a month to offload the carrier. And then likewise, it just less tedious to maneuver pieces from the carrier onto the land zone and such. Another thing I'd have issue with is this whole dynamic of how do aircraft on carriers work. And I don't know if anybody else feels this way or if it's just me. So you have your aircraft on top of the carrier. Now the carrier wants to move. Does it move like this with the aircraft on the carrier, or is it something like this? Then they move and then the aircraft catch up. You get what I'm trying to say? Because in theory,
You mean for purposes of engaging
in anything, in movement or combat or
I think
anything
they
like
have to
that,
be moved like separate pieces.
separate pieces, except in the
That's
case where in version 3 they're allied units. In the case if they're allied units, they stayed on top of that and they moved together like a transport would, right? You'd have your
you
French
can't have allied fighters on a carrier.
in version 4, yeah.
Right, yeah.
In version 3 you could put your French fighters on that carrier can move, and it worked like this, just like a transport. So in this version, how does it work? Well, do you mean you have to lift your aircraft off the carrier, move into the port, and then the aircraft land there? Now they need an extra space to get to that position as well, right?
Mhm.
And usually
Uh,
if the carrier can reach, the aircraft can reach as well.
I think that I think that the entire multinational force movement and things like that
Mm,
could use an overhaul.
mm,
I've thought about it before, and like I would argue that a unit data is and there's a couple different ways to do it. Now that's a discussion for like an
sure,
optional
yeah,
rules videos or
yeah,
house
yeah, yeah.
rules videos about, okay,
Or
I'm
tech
officially
video.
transferring command of these free French units
Yeah,
to the British because they're
sure,
in British territory.
yeah,
Okay, so for all intents and purposes, they fighting with the British,
yeah,
but then they still have to skip a turn to be able to transfer it back to French or
sure, yeah,
something
yeah,
along those
yeah,
lines.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but those are points that I wanted to bring up that were
Mm-hmm.
kind
Mm-hmm.
of worth. And this is part of the reason that I like doing this video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And even if there is something that we both read or I read or you read and we kind of we
Mm-hmm.
walk away with it with a kind of quirky understanding because
Mm-hmm.
it just didn't click because
Yeah.
no two human minds work exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Um, then the community can kind of watch and kind of go, oh wait, hold on, I think you guys are misunderstanding something.
Yeah. That's
Okay,
right.
what do
Yeah.
you got? That sort
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
So we left off with convoy rating.
Mm-hmm.
So with convoy rating, um, yeah, players may attempt to raid enemy IPPs along open convoy lines using the following units: battle cruisers, submarines, and aircraft on map. Ships may move up to their full movement before raiding. If more than one unit is raiding a line, roll both the attacker and defender convoy rolls separately for each raiding unit. If a Z zone has more than one convoy line, the attacker is able to raid up to the combined value of all convoy lines. A nation may not lose more than the maximum IPP value of each convoy line per calendar turn. Use damage markers as IPP loss trackers because each convoy line has a maximum number of IPP it may lose in a calendar turn. Remove IPP loss trackers on the convoy lines at the end of each calendar turn. So rating process. So it's basically the same as it was in version 3 for the most part, but there are some added things worth noting. Both attacker and defender roll a d6 convoy roll using the modifiers below, and unlike other aspects of the combat modifiers, these are cumulative. So +1 if a battle cruiser, coastal sub, or aircraft. +1 if more than one raiding submarine in a sea zone has developed advanced submarines technology. +2 if it's a submarine, +4 if it's an advanced submarine. Then the defender, +1 per escorting ship in the sea zone. +1 if the defender has developed ASW technology. +2 per aircraft on map, and +2 if they have developed radar technology.
Yeah, okay. So in regards to this, +1 if more than one raiding submarine in sea zone has developed advanced submarine technology. That's essentially that wolf pack technology, right? So yeah.
So they don't have to be advanced subs, you just have to have the advanced submarine technology.
Yeah, so you could have 2 coastal subs, and then they get a +1 for being together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I'm also wondering if more than one raiding submarine in a sea zone, so do they both have to be raiding that turn?
Oh, I would assume so.
Okay.
More than one raiding submarine. It explicitly says raiding submarine. So its mere presence isn't going to do anything.
Yeah. So a submarine, if it doesn't have that adjective of raiding behind it, is just a submarine in this case. But if it's raiding, that means they're both actively that turn raiding that convoy line. So you can't have an Italian submarine not doing anything that specific turn and then a German one. But then it raises the question, okay, what if the Italian submarine had raided that past turn? You know, it had raided on its turn, and now the German, excuse me, submarine comes in there too. It's not actively raiding, but it had raided in that calendar turn.
I think in this case, though, the raiding is a verb.
Yeah, but does that mean it's like what I'm saying here is perhaps the designer should put it there if more than one active submarines, right? You know, to say that the active player is the German player this turn, right? The Italian player is not the active player, even though the Italian submarine on that sea zone had raided that turn, it's still not applicable in this thing. Or maybe if that's the way the designers want to go.
Well, raiding is not a state of being. You don't you declare a sub as raiding, but he doesn't stay raiding all the way till his next turn.
But an escorting ship is.
An escorting ship is. It's a state. Yeah. It's a state.
Yeah, it's a state of being.
The rules mechanic around. But raiding is it's a type of attack.
Right.
So you raid. Everybody is raiding together.
Yeah.
You check for the bonus.
Yeah.
But if I had Italian subs raiding earlier, well, they're not counted because they're not raiding now. They raided.
Right. But some people might look at this from a different perspective and say, no, they did raid. They were raiding something.
I don't think that's what they intend. I get what you're saying, but I don't think
combat turn to raid, and so they are this turn for the calendar turn of July 20th. They spent that turn raiding.
I don't think that's what they intended. That's not how I would read it.
No, I don't think it's the way they intended.
If the discussion goes beyond just you and me, well then yeah, the designers need to clarify that.
Yeah. No, I think the designers didn't intend it that way too. But I'm looking at this with a very critical eye. Just think like, what could I pick at it? And this, if I was to try to find one, that would be it, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, I get what you're saying, and I mean, they're still, even as of yesterday, still answering kind of rule stuff that's
right,
has to be clarified.
Yeah.
All right, so if the attacker's modifier roll is greater than the defender's modified roll, determine the difference. The defender loses that amount of IPP to the bank. Example: C zone A44 has 3 British Commonwealth convoy lines totaling 15 IPP. A raiding German advanced submarine rolls a 6, and with his modifier +4, His convoy equals 10. The British player rolls a 1 with no modifier. His convoy roll equals 1. The British player thus loses 9 IPP to the bank. The British player decides which convoy lines the IPP loss should be taken from. I don't remember if I want to say the attacker decided that in version 3.
No, it was always the
Is it
defender.
always okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I
I
believe
wasn't
so.
sure.
Yeah.
Convoy raiding submarines. Escorting ships get 1 defensive roll against convoy raiding submarines. The submarines in this case do not get to fire back. They are using their attack on convoy raiding. Note, if the defender has developed ASW technology, then they get a defensive roll at 2 against raiding submarines. Example, Great Britain has developed ASW technology. A German sub raids a British convoy line with a destroyer designated as a convoy escort. The German player rolls a 3, and with his +2 modifier, the convoy roll equals 5. The British player rolls a 2, and with his +2 modifier, his convoy roll equals 4. The British player thus loses 1 IPP to the bank. The British player then gets 2 defensive rolls, 1 for the destroyer at 4 and 1 for having developed ASW at 2. If either scores a hit, the submarine is eliminated.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep, that makes sense.
Another example, 3 submarines are conducting convoy raiding in a sea zone containing a destroyer designated as an escort. The escort will provide a +1 modifier for each of the 3 separate raiding rolls, but it will only get a single defensive roll at 4 against the raiding submarines.
Mm-hmm.
So you roll your raids and then you roll your defenses. It's not roll raid, roll defense, roll raid, roll defense, roll raid,
Right,
roll
yeah.
defense.
Yeah. Yeah, this goes to the version 4 format where all if you have multiple attacks happening in the same land territory, it all happens in one kind of combat. So likewise, it's the same somewhat story to this here as well. The 3 they're separate roles, but it's effectively the same kind of combat or active territory.
Now there is some difference with strat bombing and things like that.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
You pick the order of
That's
combat.
right. Yeah,
So strat bombing damages
right. Yeah, that's
city
right.
surrounded. Strat bombing damages the airport.
Yeah,
or
that's right. Yeah,
airbase.
There's a difference there.
Now it's surrounded and they get the penalty. So
yeah.
Convoy raiding battle cruisers. Attacking battle cruisers may engage in convoy raiding regardless if they are designated as raiders or not.
Mm-hmm.
Escorting ships do not get defensive rolls against convoying battle cruisers.
Mm-hmm.
So
until they get a certain tech, I believe.
I'm not completely. I don't. That's a good question. I don't think so. I think once you get a certain tech, you start getting. You can. I think when you get radar, your chance of finding and tracking down battle cruisers is significantly higher.
Right. Let me double check on that one while we move on to the next thing, because I feel like I read that just the other day. You can continue on, man.
Convoy raiding aircraft. Attacking TAC bombers, medium bombers, and seaplanes on map may engage in convoy raiding using the raiding process procedure if there is no defending aircraft on map in the sea zone. If escorting ships are present in the sea zone, these get to fire at the raiding aircraft with a single defensive roll for each escort ship. So, raiding aircraft was a kind of an optional rule in 3rd edition. I am glad that they introduced it as a viable option for some planes in this edition, especially seaplanes, because God, they needed some help.
Yeah,
so at least it's something you can do with a seaplane somewhere somehow if
it gives them some
possibility
utility.
arises. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. So in regards to this with what I was saying with tech in regards to battle cruisers, so it doesn't say anything about the defensive die roll. It says with what is it, radar tech or anti-submarine warfare tech at once you get radar, so you get +6 modifier to opposing battle cruiser die roll, so you get bumped up from one to the
chance
other.
to actually pin them down and find them.
Or to negate the convoy raiding roll, like the escorting. It's an escort roll gets up to +6 as opposed to whatever it is +1.
I don't think that's how that works, because battle cruisers have to be pinned.
Well, what I'm talking about is if battle cruisers are raiding a convoy line, then the escorting ships, instead of whatever they would normally get, they get bumped up to +6. in the opposing battlecruiser die roll.
Okay, that's different.
Well, and this could add some questions too, because is it +6 modifier to opposing battlecruiser die roll? Is that the battlecruiser die roll for? Well, it's not the defensive die roll.
No, it's for it's for the
Spotting them,
it's for spotting them.
yeah. But
Spotting
they
them.
should
So it doesn't
emphasize
do
that.
anything to the it doesn't do anything to the actual convoy rating roll.
Yeah. Okay, I misread that. That's in radar. It's
It's
down
well,
below.
yeah, it's where the hell is it?
I thought it was down below. Oh no, maybe it's not. It's up here, maybe. I
There
don't
you
know.
are.
There.
Yes, +6 modifier to opposing battle cruiser die rolls. So that's only to find the battle cruiser and engage it. It doesn't affect their
Oh,
convoy
okay.
rating at
Well,
all.
you know what?
And I had
Yeah.
a chance to play with them in the last game, so now I have a better that I
Yeah,
played, so
yeah,
I have a
yeah.
better understanding of how battle cruisers work.
Sure.
Um,
They should, if anybody even watches our videos, that should be mentioned on there too. That could be misleading too. +6 to the modifier, battlecruiser modifier die roll. It's like, well, which one? It might be worthwhile having.
I think they need to come up with a special terminology for the
Yeah,
battle
exactly.
cruiser rate
Keywords, man.
for
Keywords.
the
Yeah.
fact that they designate a battle cruiser as a raider
Mm-hmm.
gets confused with rating subs, and it
Mm-hmm.
really kind of
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah, like
I
my
get the concept,
yeah,
but the wording is too similar.
yeah. Like my raiding submarine is also a raider.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's part of the problem.
Mm-hmm. Call it a
Okay,
surface raider, maybe. I don't know.
so convoy rating aircraft, like I was saying, I like that they can, you know, have some options to go after convoys if it is if it's a viable option and you think it's worth it, because they did do that. Not as
Mm-hmm.
extent, they're not as famous for it as the subs, but convoy lines did avoid coastal areas that were enemy held because they were worried about planes coming out and
Yeah.
hitting them.
Yeah, that's right.
So liberation. If a nation or wait, combat aftermath. After
Mm-hmm.
resolving combat in a land zone, if the attacker has one or more surviving land units, he captures the land zone and takes possession by placing his roundel or removing the enemy roundel if liberating originally possessed land zone. Adjust the industrial production point chart on the IPP value of the captured land zone. If multiple constituents of the British Commonwealth together conquer a land zone, Great Britain takes possession. There are exceptions to the attacker taking possessions in 10.1.1, and yeah, we'll get to that. So, you and I have talked about this one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's different ways to represent the way the Commonwealth worked.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different ways to cut that pie in a way to kind of make it
Sure. Yeah.
work within the game, make the rules work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get why it was chosen to work this way.
Mm-hmm.
This
Yeah.
is very unintuitive. I think
Yeah.
it's far easier and simpler to say whichever factions have land units present, one of them gets to take control up to the Commonwealth. It's up to the Commonwealth player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Because now there is a whole nother layer to this argument, which, about whether the FEC should even exist as a concept.
Yeah, I disagree.
You and I disagree on this one. Whether the FEC should exist as a concept. I think it's a legacy thing that they used in Axis and Allies, but it should
Right.
be reevaluated as to whether it's actually worth it in the game or not.
Right.
But while it's here, I think it's kind of weird that ANZAC and FEC get to go take a territory and then it goes to Britain
Yeah,
by
I
default.
agree. I
It
agree.
should be whoever's there.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever's there. Now, there is another way to cut this, which you could say, just let the Commonwealth player choose.
Sure,
Because
absolutely.
there was a lot of discussion within the Commonwealth as to who, and if you look at the map itself, you have Anzac, and Anzac is New
Mm-hmm.
Guinea and New Zealand, and there's like a couple other spots that are Anzac, but there are British controlled islands not far away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
there is some discussion there as to who should be doing what,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
during one of the games, it's like, all right, that island is like, 3 sea zones away from Anzac, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like double-digit zones away from Great Britain, but Great Britain's
Yeah.
the one who's got to pay for the militia.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, were there discussions locally about who should take over the defense of those islands? Yeah, I know there were.
Hmm.
And Anzac units did go to British administrative islands to defend them, and that's why the
Hmm.
Commonwealth gets to move and attack there, which is great. But the way that he is here, I think it's weird that okay, well, FEC and Anzac player or the FEC and Anzac, well, we're going to go ahead and we're going to jointly make sure we take all these zones so Great Britain gets the money.
Yeah, yeah, it's
That's
true.
that's weird. I don't see it being a problem to just let the Commonwealth player choose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just let them
Yeah.
choose
I
because
mean,
that's the internal politicking of the Commonwealth. So that Great Britain says, Anzac, we know you guys took this, but we're going to take over
mm,
administration so that you guys are free to go. You can justify it however you want, but
mm,
I feel that the way they wrote it is very unintuitive and
yeah,
clunky. I
yeah.
think it's clunky.
I think so. I think so. I mean, I would say your argument saying like, well, if the Anzac and FEC, you could deliberately make it so that the Anzac and the FEC pick up a territory together so that it would go to Britain and boost their income. It's like, well, okay, if you made it so that the British decide who it goes to anyways, regardless of who captures it, then you have the same problem anyways. For me, it's just endless minutia that you don't really need to get into, right? It's just let the British Commonwealth decide. Whenever the FEC or any Commonwealth nation picks up a territory, you just simply decide who it goes to, either one of the
Right.
present parties or Britain, right?
Now, I would say once that decision is made, it needs to just stay that way
Mm-hmm.
until the
Mm-hmm.
circumstances change, where maybe
Sure.
Japan comes and
Yeah.
takes it, and then they liberate it. Now it's gonna,
Yeah.
that I can deal with. But
Now, I'm trying to think of the second and third tier consequences that why they decide to do it this way. And the only thing I could come up with is maybe if it's up to the player, then they could theoretically boost the Anzac into becoming essentially a superpower, right? By picking up a lot of territories. You can still do that if you just use exclusively Anzac units, but if they're not strong enough to pick up a territory themselves, and I don't know.
yeah, but so
Yeah. So
I
yeah,
mean, I really,
exactly.
and again, if
Yeah.
you remember the Dutch East Indies in various iterations previous to this,
Hmm.
the Commonwealth player was allowed to divvy out the resources to
Sure.
wherever they
Yeah.
want.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now I'm pretty sure that happened anyway. A lot of the
Hmm.
Dutch East Indies and Southeast Asian resources went back to Britain at the beginning of
Hmm.
the war
Yeah.
because they were fighting the Germans. They were worried
Hmm.
about the Japanese, but they weren't quite sure what was going on. They have an enemy,
Hmm.
and of course there were Anzac units up in Egypt
Hmm.
at the
Hmm.
outbreak of the
Yep.
war.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
so and I always thought that made sense that the Dutch East Indies can. Oh crap! Now Japan's at that. Well, we're not going to sail all this shit back to Britain when there are perfectly good factories right there in
Sure.
Anzac. They could use
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
resources,
Totally. Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
not to full effect, but they're much closer to the front, and then send
Yeah.
some of it to India with their limited production capacity. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. That's right.
So
Yeah.
this is this is I don't know. It just doesn't. It feels unintuitive.
Sure. Yeah. I
It
agree.
really
I
feels
agree.
unintuitive and clunky.
Yeah. Yeah. There might be something like maybe in one of the playtests something showed up where it was of concern, but I can't see it. It's beyond my eyesight.
Yeah. So if somebody's watching this and goes, okay, here's something you guys are missing, please
Totally.
let us
Right.
know. But
Absolutely.
right now, I've tried my best to think about the
Hmm.
variations and like you said, consequences,
Hmm.
and I just don't think any of them are that big of a deal.
Or if there are, they don't seem bad. Yeah, like you say, not a big deal or don't seem bad. Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah. Okay, 10-10-1. If a nation captures and liberates a land zone that originally belonged to another major power of their alliance, it must immediately return to its original owner. Exception is when the original owner has surrendered. So in the case of France, let's say. Example, if USA liberates German-possessed Scotland, it would immediately return to Great Britain. If USA liberates German-possessed Aquitaine, USA would be able to keep it, as Free France is not a major power. As soon as France is liberated and Free France becomes a major power, Aquitaine would immediately return to France. Now, could I pause here for 1 second? Because in the summer offensive I played over with Sky Marshal, so at one point, so Free France was established in North Africa, and then they recaptured Paris, and so Free France became a major power, and then the Germans recaptured Paris. Like the capital didn't move; it still stayed in North Africa.
Mm-hmm.
But then Free France doesn't surrender, right? So its capital was taken over. Sorry, not its capital. Paris was retaken. Now, does it lose its major power status? And I know this is
Well,
version 4, but
in version 4, if
yeah.
France only surrenders once,
Hmm.
is my understanding.
Yeah. But
So there
see,
is no making another free
yeah,
France.
in
In
version 3, it says even if like France never shows up again, it's always going to be Free France from that point to the end of the game. as far as I
Yeah,
know.
I think in version 4 they become okay. You liberate Paris.
Mm.
Everything that's free French now just reverts to being French, but then they lose Paris again. Well, now they surrender like any other nation.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but anyways,
That's my
that's
understanding.
yeah,
That's my
yeah,
understanding.
yeah. I don't know about
Because
that.
I'm pretty sure it says that free France can only be made
Yeah,
once.
yeah,
All right,
yeah.
we're gonna re-up the video feed here.
Oh yeah. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Good to go.
Okay, we are up and running. So I was just saying how so here's where I got confused. It says this can only happen once in at least one spot on the French reference sheet.
Hmm.
So I think what they're referencing is the way France surrenders, meaning Paris
Oh,
being surrounded, and thus the creation of Vichy France only happens once. So that
okay.
was where I got confused.
Hmm.
So after they retake Paris, France continues to fight tooth and nail,
Hmm.
but and they get to relocate their capital, but they're not free French anymore, as far as I understand. Meaning all the whatever special rules Free French has
Yeah.
don't apply anymore. Meaning you're not raising infantry wherever you
Yeah.
want and things like
Yeah.
that. You are now still a major power, but you
Hmm.
don't surrender.
Sure. Yeah. See,
So
but that's the difference between version 3 and 4, because in version 3, once France falls, France never comes back the entire rest of the game. It's always exists as free France. The only difference is it evolves to become a major power. In this game, it's different because France surrenders, becomes free French. Paris is recaptured, France is reestablished, and at that point, doesn't matter. Free France ceases to exist, and at that point, doesn't matter what happens on the map. France exists until the end of time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep. Okay, so
That's
that
it.
makes more
Yeah.
sense then. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Now
Back to where we were. 10 point. Ah, there it is. We missed it. Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
okay, liberation. We're in that third paragraph.
A major power conquered a land zone, conquering a land zone in Chinese-owned country that it did not originally own may decide to keep it or give it to one of the Chinese factions. Interesting. Can you give it to one of the neutral? No, I guess that wouldn't work. This must be decided immediately after conquest. After returning, unless the two nations are aligned, the major power moves all his units from the land zone to the nearest land zone in his possession. Other instances of returning a land zone to another nation are not allowed. All right.
I know early on there was a big discussion about this one,
Mm-hmm.
about how it works and variations on it
Mm-hmm.
and how some kind of unintended problems that came up.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
So the one that I could see coming up is okay. So the British are moving up from French territory. They're moving through Vietnam, through Annam Tonkin, and they capture Kwang Tung, and then they're like, time for us to go home. And so then they liberate Kwang Tung and teleport themselves all the way back to Burma. In theory, that would work. Because
unless these
it's
two nations are aligned.
so he can give it to the CCP and then
Oh, I see what you're
teleport
saying.
himself to
Yeah.
Burma. Yeah.
Although the Allies should not be able to give that territory back to the CCP.
Well, it says to either
Yeah, I
to
know,
either.
but historically they shouldn't be able to. That would have been crazy.
I don't know. I was
The
reading up
okay,
about.
the hatred between pre-war hatred
Mhm,
between you got to and this is another sticking point that I talk about with that whole Russia, France,
mhm,
Italy thing that happened
mhm,
in the game here. Up until Germany was a real threat, which was when they actually like attacked Poland and shit and started and really
mhm,
started the main body of the war. Most people were concerned about communism.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Okay, they were the bigger threat up until they weren't the biggest threat anymore.
Mhm, yeah,
And
yeah.
so sometimes it is very awkward the way that the freedom that the Comintern has and the Allies have to interact with the Comintern in a way that is very very ahistorical.
Mm.
Like Russia
Yeah.
declaring war in Italy in 1939 so it can get its wartime bonus income. That would have been it. That I mean, my God, that would be, uh, really kind of an absurd scenario in the real
Sure.
world.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
All right, moving on.
But I do want to make one point here. Like,
All right.
if USA liberates a German-possessed Scotland, it would immediately return to Great Britain. But I, if Free France is the thing, why don't they just take back their old territories?
Yeah, I don't know.
I
Don't know.
really, this is kind of another example of. I'm sure there's some logic behind it,
Hmm.
but it just seems like okay, well, we liberate part of France, Free France just takes it over. I think
Hmm.
that'd be the simpler and easier way to handle it. I know they're
Yeah.
not a major power, but again, you can just put an asterisk next to them. Free France is always going
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
an exception in this case.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. You
liberate
could. Yeah.
French territory, it goes back to Free French. The Free French come in, as
Yeah.
disorganized as they were, it goes back to them. It feels like it's an awkward step to have it temporarily part of these other
Yeah.
guys, you know.
Yeah. I have an idea, but this is again is like the unforeseen, second or third tier unforeseen consequences. If Vichy France is at war with Free France and America captures Aquitaine, could not Vichy France go in there and America is forced to give it to Free France? Could not Vichy France move into Aquitaine without engaging the American units and capture that territory from Free France, even though American units are sitting on top of it, and then that's Vichy territory, and the American units are what teleported to Britain, you
Well, we
know?
just had a huge discussion about this with Italy and Russia again, when Italian units being in like a German held territory and that kind of messy
Mm-hmm.
situation. And
Right.
the final ruling was that you just can't attack it. If you attack it, you have to declare war. So if you have
Okay.
American units in a free French territory, technically Vichy cannot attack it.
Okay. Well, if yeah,
Now,
and so that's what
that's
you
my
guys came up with.
understanding. I
Okay.
don't think there's anything hard and written, but that's my
Yeah. Yeah.
understanding of how that
Okay.
was kind of
Okay. Gotcha.
explained.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
because there was a situation where it's like, okay, well, you've got Britain or you've got the U.S. wants to go into France, but there are Italian units, so the only units present in Aquitaine, for example. What happens?
Mm-hmm.
And I know there was kind of this that's such a rare situation. We're not even gonna
Mm-hmm.
worry about it. But I think the general consensus was that it just you to do that you have to declare war on Italy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, Now, and there's a whole lot of other ways to handle that. There's a whole lot of different ways to cut that pie too. Quite
Mm-hmm.
frankly, you could even argue, look, if Italians are occupying any part of German-held territory, they're at war.
Yeah. That's what I would say. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That then they have now, and there is some historical logic to that. And I have actually asked the historian about this.
Is that something you could do in version 4 where you could move neutral Italian units into German occupied territory, German
Well, they're
held
not
territory?
neutral because if let's say
Oh,
well
they're at war with
they're at
Russia.
war with somebody else. And so there's a third group there. There's a
Oh.
third set. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it really should. Quite frankly, it should be more cleaned
That's
up there.
hilarious. Yeah, yeah. That's
Um,
funny.
but yeah, so you have this kind of weird.
Because you could even argue at that point, well, Italy hasn't gone to war against anybody. So they're still illegal for the Americans to declare war on Italy. Yeah, it's complex. So
But in that case, if Italy hasn't gone to war with anybody, then they can't be in German-held territory.
unless Germany's at war with Russia.
Then Italy has to be at war with Russia because
Well,
Italy and
yeah, so
Germany,
that's what I mean. So Italy's maintained its neutrality throughout the entire game,
right?
and then Russia declares war on Italy, and Germany's also at war with Russia. So now Italian units could, in theory, go into
Well,
French territory
I
held
don't
by
think
Germany.
I don't think Russia can declare war on Italy in that circumstance.
No, I thought they were allowed to. I thought they were under different restrictions than the Allies were. But I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
My understanding is still that if Italy, hold
We're in a bit of a tangent here, aren't we?
on, yeah, well, I mean, this is worth kind of.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Let's see, chapter 5.
Yeah, it could declare war on any other nation once at wartime income. Russia, it can. It doesn't say anything about if they have to be, if the Italians are at war or not. Or any other nation. Well, yeah.
All right, that's silly.
It's
That
different,
that's silly.
right?
That's silly.
So, so
I
you
mean, the
could
fact that
see a
Russia can
game.
declare war on anybody at any time under any circumstances
Oh yeah,
is I
you could do
and
that
we
day one.
just had this conversation the
Yeah,
other day. It is an abusable aspect
yeah,
of the
yeah.
rules at this
Well, you
point.
could do that turn one if you wanted to, right?
But
Declare
you got to
war,
be at
start getting.
19.
Oh
You
yeah,
have to,
fair enough.
you have
Okay,
to
you
be at
could do.
19.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 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 Oh, sorry. Yeah. Once you're at wartime income. Yeah. 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 But
So
still,
this is
that could
our
create
other
this.
okay. Declare war on allies. Yes, once at wartime, and if the
And any other nation is the axis once at wartime income.
oh
So
yeah,
in
well,
theory,
so
you
there's no
could.
reason they should. So basically, once they're at wartime income, in most cases, they should just declare war in Italy.
Sure, I
Just
can't see
declare
why it
war in
wouldn't
Italy
be.
to start getting. So one, you can
It'll be
start
the
to.
meta strategy. Yeah, yeah.
That's ludicrous. That's absurd.
There's
I'm
gonna be another
sorry.
video after this,
That's
gentlemen.
absurd.
You know.
That's
Yeah.
absurd.
But yeah, that would be funny because now the Americans can't declare war on the Italians that are sitting in no, German-held French territory, guarding the border. So what happens then? I mean, you could say, okay, well, it's simple then. Simply, the Americans just capture the territory from underneath the Italians' feet, and then the Italians are what
My
teleported back to the next territory.
don't get me started on the teleportation. Okay,
Well, no, sorry, not teleported.
this
They move
this
back in
this.
a
All right, I'll say right now, this is an aspect of the rules that needs to be cleaned up.
sure, yeah,
It
sure,
needs to be cleaned up. Russia should not have that freedom.
yeah. I agree. I
They should
agree.
not have that freedom. They shouldn't be allowed to declare on war on anybody that isn't on their border.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, but then again,
Okay.
what about naval situations? Like, I agree because
No,
USSR was,
no. Russia
yeah,
going down and attacking the Dutch East Indies would have been a declaration of war by everybody in the world on Russia.
yeah, I agree. I agree.
Okay. Again, and yeah, and you know, and this goes back to that argument of sandbox trying to make a World
hmm
War II game as sandbox as possible
hmm
and ignoring the historical
Yeah,
realities of the
yeah, yeah,
situation.
yeah. I mean, I would
And
say
there
that.
is historical realities that are that I sorry do need
Sure,
to be
yeah,
adhered to,
yeah, yeah.
and then at the same time there are real consequences the way you write the rules.
Mm,
And this one of Russia being able to declare war on Italy as soon as it reaches 19 IPP is both historically absurd and mechanically it doesn't make
yeah,
any sense to me.
yeah. But the
Now,
fixes
feel
behind it.
free in the comments below
Yeah,
to tell me if you think I'm wrong.
yeah, yeah. Look, I think the response you'll get is like, well, it can't declare war on. It has to be able to declare war on people outside of its adjacent borders. Because what about America? What about Britain? Well, I would say the response is just categorize it. In the case of the Allies, you can declare war on these circumstances. In the case of everybody else, they have to be adjacent to their
Well,
territory.
you know, and this is another problem that you come in with game design is people
Mm-hmm.
want to create one sentence and then have that one sentence cover every aspect of the game.
Which is
Get
ideal, right?
over it.
Yeah, but it's the ideal
That is
situation to
that
have.
is not work
Yeah, it doesn't work. Yeah.
all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
I know people want I know people there are people who want to create like one sentence and then have that cover all the situations there. I don't got to
Absolutely.
think
Yeah.
about it
Yeah.
again. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, you don't get to do that, especially with
Yeah.
a historical war game.
Yeah. Yeah. It gets complex, but then you get massive rule books. So I understand the desire, but it just sometimes doesn't work. Okay, let's get back on track.
All right. Um,
Oh, I guess we're basically here.
well, capturing enemy capitals.
Mm-hmm.
If a nation loses its capital, the conquered player loses all possessed IPPs to the bank without a capital. A nation cannot collect income. Note that ANZAC and FEC are exceptions. Refer to the National Reference Sheet. CCP and KMT do not have a capital until they evolve to a major power,
Mm-hmm.
but they are exceptions to this rule and may collect income without possessing a capital.
Mm-hmm.
The first time in the game French surrenders to an Axis power, the conquering player gets to keep all French possessed IPPs as spoils of war.
Yeah, so that's interesting that they, in theory, like it's an impossibility basically, but if the Russians manage to capture French capital, they would get to keep the
Or
money
Italy.
too. Yeah, or Italy. Yeah, yeah, that's cool. I like that.
I mean, I don't know, maybe that is I don't know, maybe there's a rare case where that's possible, where Italy gets to capture France, Paris.
Yeah, no, no.
Um,
Something worth exploring, right? Build a couple air transports and bide your
yeah,
time.
that's, I guess Vichy would still be created.
Hmm. Well, you could do it in such a way where Germany's pushing hard, and then Italy, like
Italy
maybe they get
acquiesces.
bogged down. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
but Italy would get the money. They wouldn't keep France. They wouldn't. My guess is they wouldn't.
What
There's
if
all those.
Vichy France would probably be created too, but in that case, would it be going to Germany, or would it be controlled by Germany, or would it be controlled by the conquering player? It's like Russia captures Paris, but it all goes to Germany.
That's a wonky one. Now that's
Oh
very
yeah,
now even I'll say that's very
unlikely. Yeah,
unlikely.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And rules can't cover everything, with the
yeah,
extensive
they can.
different, well, with the
Yeah, they
extensive
can.
different combinations you could do. Okay, with a rule book this big, right? It's like, if Japan captures
No, I'm
Paris,
sorry. I've played games more complex than this.
no,
I have
no.
played games more complex than this with a smaller rule book.
Yeah, but depend, like, okay, were
I,
they,
I,
well, yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't buy that. I don't buy that argument. I just don't. Oh well, that should really be clarified. Oh well, you want the rule book to be 800 pages long? I'm like, well, if that's what it takes to make the rules work, yes.
Yeah, I don't know. If we
Yeah,
want all the features in
absolutely.
there that we
Because
want, but
if you're gonna cut stuff out that people have questions, then what was the point of writing the rules in the first place?
yeah, yeah, fair enough.
So yeah, I do expect rules to cover all situations.
I don't know. There'd be a lot of weird situations covered then.
Well, that's you can write rules to cover them.
I suppose
And there's a
so.
way and here's the thing. People go, "Okay, well, I've written the rule this way. So now you have this situation, but because of the way this rule is written, this situation there's an oddball here and an oddball here and an oddball
Mm,
here. Well, do I write a rule for each one of those oddball situations? Well, maybe. Or do I need to take it a step back to this stage
sure.
and reevaluate this rule? And
Yeah,
that's what
yeah.
a lot of people forget.
Yeah,
And
no, that's
again,
fair.
this is from very real personal experience.
Mm,
You sometimes you gotta take it back two steps, and you need to
mm,
reevaluate the foundation of the rules.
yeah, that's
And
right.
sometimes
Yep.
you're going to go, yeah, I need to really rethink how all that works rather than trying
Mm,
to cobble
sure.
on. And I mean, Advanced Dungeons and Advances and Dragons was an example of this. It was not a good foundation for rules, and every time an oddball situation came up, they just tacked on a
Yeah.
different rule, and you had this weird amalgamation of rules that just did not play well
Mm,
together,
sure.
as
Yeah.
opposed to third edition, which has an understandable baseline and things that get tacked on merge
Yeah.
relatively smoothly with the existing rules.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that again, that's tangent into game design philosophy. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, I do. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I do expect the rules to cover all circumstances. As a consumer, I do.
yeah. Yeah. All right.
Relocating a capital: Great Britain, France, Free France, USA. I almost said USSA as I was looking at USSR. USA and USSR must relocate their capital if it is captured. They may move it back to its original location at any time if it is no longer enemy possessed.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's pretty
Sure.
straightforward. And
Yeah.
each one of
Pretty
those
good. Yeah.
sheets tells you where and how you can
Yeah.
do that. And now, of course, and I've done this with Free France. I've done this mistake with Free France. Is you put your capital at the most
Sure.
obvious central powerful
Mm,
location and then you
yeah.
lose it a turn or two later
Yeah.
because it
That's
was
right.
you stuck it out there and it's like crap.
Yeah.
So one thing to keep in mind for everybody else,
hmm
think about where you put your capital. Just don't kind of,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I'll put it in Algeria and then I lose Algeria. Wonderful.
Yeah. And since it's at any time, you don't have to do it immediately when that territory is captured. Then you could wait, 5 turns after Moscow is recaptured, and then be like, all right, I think it's safe
And
enough to move it back.
that raises an interesting thing with liberating Paris.
hmm
If you're in a position where you're like, well, I took Paris, but it was bloody and I think he's going to take it back.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Maybe I don't want to move my capital back.
Yeah.
And I think from a historic, real, practical perspective, yeah, it's like, well, look, we can move back to Paris, but the fighting is still so heavy.
hmm
What good is it going to do? We're going to have to.
hmm
It would suck
Sure.
to. I mean, yes, everybody wants to like they would want to go back into Paris and liberate it and
hmm
reestablish themselves, but at the same time, how much of a blow to morale would it be to have to run away again?
Sure. Yeah. That's right.
So, from a player perspective, taking time to think about that and go, let's wait a turn or two till Europe
hmm
settles.
That's right. Yeah.
So, all right, we can roll. Non-combat movement isn't super big.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
During non-combat movement phase, you may move your units that did not move during combat movement. You may not move into land zones through canals that were captured this player turn.
Mhm.
through canals that were okay. So the canals thing is an important thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Militia can only start and end non-combat movement in home country.
Hmm.
So they rewrote this so that you could actually pick up militia with
Yeah.
transports
That's right. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
long as they end in home country. And I'm
Hmm.
really glad they did that because
Sure.
that is
Yeah.
perfectly legitimate to move
Yeah.
militia from London up
Yeah.
to Scotland all of a
Yeah.
sudden just by
That's right. Yeah.
virtue of you
Yeah.
have to do that,
Totally.
or
Yeah.
Russia.
Why not?
Russia's a great example too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, in theory, you could also use militia as part of an amphibious assault now
Yeah. True.
because
True.
they
True.
can't retreat.
But this is in non-combat, though, I suppose.
Can only start in.
I would have
Oh,
to.
can only start and end non-combat movement in home countries, but they can still combat move.
Yeah. I don't know. I'd
Yeah,
have to
militia can
refresh my
still
memory.
combat move in home country.
Yeah.
So you can pick them up, use them to amphibiously assault into
Hmm.
home country because there is no option other than to end your
Yeah.
movement in home country.
Sure. Yeah. That's fair.
And
That's
in
fair.
a desperate situation, you might do just that.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean,
No,
I
that's
don't think
fair.
that's, you just get guys, throw them on a boat and say, all right, we're going over there.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
So I don't see why that wouldn't work with my understanding, because if you can, you know,
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah. But
Sure.
anyway,
I agree.
strategic rail movement. Now, there's not really any huge differences between version 3 and version 4 for strategic rail movement. Um, as far as I know, you can still use rivers. Uh, if a river travels between two land zones, one side may not be enemy possessed. So simply possessing one side of a river. Oh, it's Little Jinx.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, go on.
Railroad gauges. There are two types of railroad gauges, narrow and wide. A unit cannot strategic rail move across gauge change without improved logistics technology.
Hmm. Hmm.
German wants a strategic rail move 4 units into the USSR as close as possible to Kiev. Due to the reduced rail capacity in the USSR and the gauge change, all units have to stop in eastern Poland.
Hmm.
Had the German player developed improved logistics technology, all 4 units could have been strategically rail moved into Kiev.
Hmm.
Um, so looking at the map, though, there are places where I believe, uh, yeah, well, okay, yeah, that kind of clears that up. So it has to stop.
Yeah.
It
It
has to
has
stop.
to stop.
There's
Yeah.
no moving four over, but then two of them continue into to use the two rail in
Yeah.
Russia. No, they have
Yeah.
to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think that's a little. I get why, but I think it's unfortunate that that is why. Because it is again 6 months. You think in theory you should be able to, because you're already paying a bit of a penalty because you have to reduce your strategic rail capacity as you cross across that border. So by railing units all the way from Aquitaine all the way to Russia, it's 6 months. Sure, why not? And then you also have to leave a few of the units behind in Eastern Poland anyways, because your capacity just reduced itself by a considerable margin.
Well, that does raise a question for me. It's like, okay, so my narrow gauge, because I think it's Russia has the narrow gauge, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
Russia has the narrow gauge.
You go outside.
Um,
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Bye.
so they have narrow gauge connected
Hmm.
to territories that are wide gauge.
Right.
I have to stop, but
Hmm.
then I've got narrow gauge connected to that rail line.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
can I pick up from there and move two in, or do I have to then spend an entire turn walking into the
Right.
Russian
Yeah.
territory with
Yeah.
narrow gauge, and then I can use
Yeah.
the
Oh,
narrow
yeah.
gauge
It's
cable?
it's a little bit wonky
I do
sometimes.
have
You
a
have to figure.
question
Yeah.
about that
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because, now if you told me that they had to stop regardless, that's fine. But units
Mm.
that were already there in that area where the other guy stopped, like let's say
Mm.
Poland.
What I've always visualized, what I've always visualized the map is like there's like a center point on each territory, and the railways go all the way to that center point, and then from that center point onwards, they go into large or wide gauge or whatever, narrow gauge from that point onwards, right? And so
Mhm.
that kind of gets around that idea. But the problem is the map doesn't reflect that. The map says in this territory, right here at the border is where you switch between narrow and wide gauge. So yeah, it is up for debate to some extent. Yeah. Could you scoot up for 1 second about these rivers things? So one thing I wish we'd see a little bit more in regards to rivers is that you could play around with them a little bit more, that there'd be more utility behind them, longer rivers and such. Now, I'm not saying that you should change strategically what it would look like, but it would be interesting, right? People miss this stuff, but the Chinese can rail effectively, strategic rail a unit from Yunnan all the way to Guangdong or Nanking rather by river.
I think river rail movement is easily overlooked. I've
Oh, totally.
overlooked
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah,
And really, I should just sit down and look
yeah,
at the map and and
yeah.
just spend some time making a mental note of
Sure.
all those rivers and
Yeah.
what other opportunities they open up
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
movement.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, because it's such and it is absolutely
Mm-hmm.
historically, obviously rivers are huge for commerce
Mm-hmm.
and movement of troop resources.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's overlooked within the game itself
Totally. Yeah.
because it's not really specially marked. It doesn't
Yeah.
stand out. Most people just think
No.
of rivers as
That's right.
being a combat barrier.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and there's not too many. There are some that are utilitarian for sure, but a lot of them are covered by railways anyways. But there's some that really stand out in some more foreign countries where it's like, yeah, that could be totally doable, right? Yeah. Anyways, moving on.
Let's see. Non-combat air movement. Aircraft may fly over enemy possessed and land and
Oh,
sea
oh,
zones containing.
one thing. So,
Oh yeah.
in regards to rivers, what about if there's an impassable marsh between them? So let's say Pripyat marshes, and you're railing something from southern Belarusia all the way out to basically Crimea, and there's impassable marshes. Now, I don't think it's gonna ever matter because you have railways there, but it might be the interesting
Well,
occasion
but
once in a
railroads
while.
can be bombed now. Rivers cannot.
Right. Yeah, good point. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
There might
that
be the odd exception, but yeah. Anyways, interesting.
um,
And there's Wintermute's email if anybody wants to shoot him a direct email.
yeah. Well, I have it on my YouTube page
Oh,
if
there
you
you
need
go.
some.
Okay,
Because some
perfect.
people want to
Yeah.
talk about stuff
Sure.
that they don't want to put in the post. They don't want
Yeah,
to put in
yeah.
the messages,
Yeah, fair.
and
Yeah.
they don't want to because they just don't want to and I know there are people who want to ask rules, they want to have discussions,
Mm-hmm.
but they're afraid to do it in a public forum
Yeah. Oh, no doubt. Yeah.
because of various reasons.
Sure.
And I get that. And it's a lot sometimes to put yourself out there and worry because look, I've dealt with anxiety my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
It's I've overcome it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this. But it's so I always put my email out there for people who want to maybe talk one on
Mm-hmm.
one in a non-public forum if they want to ask questions
Right, right.
or make a comment about something. I don't have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
Like anything else, though, so long as you're polite and respectful, absolutely, you can email me directly, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll talk about stuff, or maybe we'll get something on WhatsApp.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I did want to. You were talking about. Uh, well, if the yeah, I actually okay. Let's say that I'm looking at the Pripyat marshes right
Mm-hmm.
now. And yeah, I see that being one contiguous river going from Smolensk all the way down to Kiev and then beyond.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say if for some reason that rail was damaged between the Pripyat marshes, you could still use the river.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see
Well,
that being an issue.
the concern there is that it's impassable, right? So is it impassable to everything or just,
Uh, Based purely on my understanding of geography, I would say that you could still use the river.
I'd say why not,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And I know the Pripyat marshes weren't as impassable as most games make them out to
Yeah.
be. I've actually
My
seen
rationale too is that there's
closed in maps, and yeah,
yeah,
it's kind of nasty, but
yeah,
you could still get shit through there.
yeah. And also there's a
And there were
railway going
roads,
through
there were
there.
roads running through the Pripyat marshes.
And as we see on this map, there's a railway going through there as well. So
Right,
it's
yeah.
assumed by the designers that it's something you could do.
I have no idea. I mean, yeah, that's worth asking, but
Yeah.
if the
That's not
river's
a big
there,
deal.
I don't see why you couldn't use the river.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Is it just me, or is it turning into white railways there as opposed to yellow, or is that just the glare of the
That's the
camera?
glare. That's the
Okay.
glare.
No.
But here's where I was talking. You've got this territory right next to I'm pointing to the screen as if you could see me. This area right next to southern Belarusia and
Right.
Poland.
Yeah.
So do I need to? So I have to stop there and then
Yeah.
the next turn walk into
Totally. Yeah.
Belarusia and then rail,
Yeah. I would hope not
or do I
because
have to move and then? Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, you get what I'm saying?
that's effectively 3 turns there, right? So
Yeah, that
yeah,
seems a bit harsh.
it beats
Or do
harsh.
I
Yeah.
stop in that Polish territory and then because it's connected to a
I
narrow
would say.
gauge,
I would
I
say,
just
yeah.
pick up at the narrow gauge right at that border and
People
then
have always said you're effectively moving your army from the border, right? From the border onwards. So from the Black Line onwards. Anyways, moving on. Moving on.
all right. Non-combat air movement. You may fly over enemy possessed land and sea zones containing enemy units if there are no enemy fighters in that zone.
Mm,
Aircraft may not fly over nations they are not at war with or aligned with, except when crossing canals or
mm.
straits. So, Italy can now fly over
Yeah.
the Suez Canal.
Yeah. Yeah. That's nice. That's nice.
Yeah, a lot of people have said, "Oh, that feels so much better." It kind of makes sense. Britain wouldn't have necessarily denied them, even if they didn't like them. But this is a hardened. I think this is an example of a deliberate decision to make a rule hard, fast, and
Hmm.
simple
Yeah.
to avoid bogging down the game, even
Sure.
though it doesn't quite jive. And a lot
Yeah.
of people I know house rule it, and that is not being able to fly over zones containing without any enemy fighters.
Yeah. Yeah.
A
Yeah.
lot of people have said you fly through and there's one round of
Oh, okay.
automatic round if they want to. There's one automatic round of
Kind of like an
interception
interception.
combat,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
then you
Yep. I
keep
like that.
going. And then if you come back, there's one more round, and then you keep on moving. That's generally what I've heard as a house rule. And
Hmm.
but I definitely get why they simply said, yeah, that also is a lot more extra rounds of combat within the pre-combat phase and post-combat phase that maybe people don't want to deal with.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's
And
fair. Yeah.
so me personally, I'm perfectly okay with having that house rule. But for the game design, I get why they said, nope, just real simple, straight to the point. Here you go. That's it. That's all there is.
Hmm. 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 Yeah.
But I do know that's a common house rule. And maybe we'll see 4.5 will introduce it or something.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Aircraft move independently from carriers during the non-combat movement phase. Thus, aircraft are not carried 3
Okay.
sea
Yeah.
zones by a carrier,
Yeah.
then fly 4 more zones or vice versa. And that's a
Yeah.
common new
Oh, yeah.
people who have played this game before,
They understand.
they
Yeah.
understand that. People who haven't, that one throws them. So I'm glad that's
Hmm.
clarified.
Hmm.
Aircraft have a -2 movement if taking off from a damaged carrier.
Hmm.
They also clarified that damaged carriers can still hold aircraft, but the aircraft suffer a movement penalty.
Hmm.
I like that.
Yeah. I like it.
Yeah, simple and clean.
Yeah. That's right.
Aircraft returning from a combat must use the remaining movement points to return to a suitable landing spot. Aircraft may fly over land zones just captured this player turn, but may not land there.
Hmm.
An aircraft on map may opt to return to a land zone or carrier using its map range during the non-combat movement phase.
Hmm.
Aircraft that are unable to reach a suitable landing spot are eliminated.
Eliminated. Yeah. Yeah.
Example, Great Britain is at war with Germany, but neutral with Italy. There is a British tactical bomber in Gibraltar, the German destroyer in Sea Zone M3, and an Italian fighter on map in Sea Zone M2. Oh, I'm trying to visualize that.
Yeah.
Okay. It is Great Britain's turn, and the tactical bomber flies 2 spaces from Gibraltar and successfully attacks the German destroyer in Sea Zone M3. At this moment, Italy declares war on Great Britain.
Mm.
As the tactical bomber is unable to find a suitable landing spot, it is eliminated.
Mm. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
Italian fighter on map.
Because they can't fly through enemy fighters.
Fighters. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I'm still trying to paint the picture in my head.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, I get it.
Works, I guess. It's one of those
Yeah,
things to consider as an attacker now.
it's very direct and clean. Now, although I didn't think you could declare war during the combat phase. I thought it was like during the combat phase.
This would be the non-combat movement phase in the case of Britain.
Oh, okay. I guess that makes sense then.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it spells it out and gives you a very good example of how it works.
Yeah.
Though I can already see some people wanting to house rule that in the same
Absolutely,
way.
Yeah.
Okay.
But keep in mind,
come back through, we have a round of interception combat, and then
Yeah.
we continue on.
The nice thing though too is that Italy only could do all this once. It could only declare war once and trap its opponent this way. So it's a small advantage that the Italians can throw into the fight if they want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think it's
And I've said
overkill.
before, I like the fact that you have a lot of freedom when it comes to declaring when you
Yeah.
declare war.
Yeah. Yeah.
It gives you investment in the game when you're not doing your turn,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
rather than just go, okay, did he move over there? Okay, great. It gives you a reason to pay attention. Now, I will say this. While I like the idea of the interception rule flying
Yeah.
over enemy fighters and whatnot, it's probably not gonna work with a YouTube war.
No, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
It becomes a lot more cumbersome
Mm-hmm.
because then every time you do that, and it could happen multiple times in a certain turn, unless you've got the other player on the phone,
Mm-hmm.
because he may opt not to rise
Sure.
up because you've
Yeah.
got three fighter escorts, and
Yeah.
he's only got two fighters there, and he says, I don't like those odds.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you assume that? Now, sometimes in the YouTube wars, we kind of go, okay, I'm pretty sure he's gonna not want to engage me here, just given the overwhelming firepower. However, if he decides otherwise, then he can let me know and we can back it up a little. And unless it's super urgent for that moment, that's
Mm-hmm.
how it can usually be handled.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this just becomes a little more cumbersome. That house rule, which I do like, becomes a little more cumbersome in an example like a YouTube war.
Sure. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree.
All right. You want the next one, or are you distracted with
No,
mini
no.
me?
Air transports may transport land units, refer to 1315. If an air transport is destroyed while carrying units, the units it carries are also destroyed. They may pick up their cargo up before or during their non-combat move and continue to move up to their full movement points after they are unloaded their cargo in a friendly possessed land zone. You can transport aligned members of your alliance's forces with your air transports, such units would load on their player turn, move up on your turn, and unload on the next player's turn. So it works very much like naval transports. But I do like how they clarify this, because in version 3, it was there's a couple of games I played thinking that the unit that's going with the air transport must take off from the same zone where the air transport is starting its movement from.
Mhm.
So it's nice that they clarified this.
Yeah. Also, air transports don't end their movement when they drop off.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
They
absolutely.
they can finish their movement to go
Yeah,
somewhere else,
yeah, that's right.
even if it's non-com movement. And I know I had to double check that myself because I'm like, wait, do they work just like naval transports? Because I really don't want to leave them up.
Yeah,
You know the game I'm talking about, the one where I'm dropping guys off in northern England.
yeah.
Um, and it's like I don't really want to leave him up there in case he gets hinky. But
Hmm.
I double checked. It's like, oh no, he can actually go
Come
back to
back. Yeah,
Germany and he can just
that's right.
drop off a guy, come back to safety every turn.
Yeah.
So that was good to get clarified. Naval non-combat movement. Okay, we're gonna stop